The darkness inside the Henderson family's home in Eugene, Oregon, was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was the kind of darkness that felt like it was holding its breath. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the silence was shattered. Not by the storm outside, but by a sound that no parent should ever hear coming from their child's bedroom. It was a scratching sound, rhythmically repetitive. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Mark Henderson, a high school history teacher who prided himself on logic, woke up first. His wife, Sarah, was already stirring beside him. "Do you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. This was the fourth night of the episodes that the doctors had dismissed as mere night terrors. But night terrors don't sound like claws on drywall. Mark grabbed the baseball bat he kept behind the door, a futile gesture against what was waiting for them, and rushed down the hallway. When he threw open the door to 5-year-old Noah's room, the air hit him first. It didn't smell like a child's room. It didn't smell of lavender laundry detergent or old plastic toys. It smelled of wet earth, rank, decomposing leaves, copper, and undeniably the stale, acrid stench of cheap cigarette smoke. Noah was not in his bed. The little boy, wearing his Paw Patrol pajamas, was huddled in the far corner of the room. He was on his knees, facing the wall. His small fingers were curled into claws, scraping against the plaster, leaving bloody streaks where his nails had broken. "Noah!" Sarah screamed, rushing forward to pull him away. "Noah, stop it! You're hurting yourself!" When the boy turned around, Mark dropped the bat. The face looking back at them belonged to their son, but the expression did not. Noah's eyes were dilated so wide the blue irises were swallowed by black. His jaw was set in a rigid, furious clench that looked unnatural on a toddler's soft face. He was sweating profusely, his skin gray and clammy. "Don't touch the evidence," the boy rasped. The voice was wrong. It was deep, rough, and breathless, like a man who had been running for miles, or a man whose lungs were filling with fluid. "Noah, honey, it's Mommy. You're dreaming," Sarah cried, trying to hug him. Noah shoved her away with a strength that sent her stumbling back. "My name," the boy hissed, spitting the words out, "is not Noah. Why aren't you listening to me? I told you to check the silo. He put the lime on my face. It burns. The dirt is in my mouth." Mark fell to his knees, eye level with his son. "Who put lime on your face, Noah? Who are you talking about?" The boy grabbed Mark's collar, pulling him close. The smell of cigarettes on the child's breath was overpowering now, a phantom scent manifesting physically. "Sterling," the boy whispered. "Sheriff Sterling. He took the bribe. I have the tape, but he buried me before I could mail it." Then, as quickly as the possession had taken hold, it vanished. Noah's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed into his father's arms, limp and unconscious. Mark looked up at the wall where Noah had been scratching. In the dim light of the lightning flash outside, he saw what his son had been carving into the paint. It wasn't a picture. It wasn't a scribble. It was a date, carved with frantic precision. November 14th, 1989. Mark looked at Sarah. The fear in her eyes mirrored his own. Noah was born in 2019. He didn't know numbers this well. He didn't know what a silo was, and he certainly shouldn't know the name Sterling. The Hendersons didn't know it yet, but the entity screaming in their son's body wasn't a demon. It was a witness, and the trial was about to begin, 30 years too late. The next morning, the sun rose over a household that felt like a crime scene. Noah sat at the kitchen table eating his cereal, humming a tune from a cartoon. He remembered nothing. When Sarah asked him about his hands, bandaged now covering the torn fingernails, he simply said, "I fell down." But Mark couldn't let it go. He had called in sick to work. The name Sterling and the date, 1989, were burned into his mind. He sat in his study, laptop open, hands hovering over the keyboard. He felt foolish. He was a rational man. But the smell of that cigarette smoke still lingered in his nose. He typed, "Sheriff Sterling, Oregon, 1989. The internet connection seemed to lag, increasing the tension in the room. Then, the results populated. Mark's breath hitched. Headline, "Coastal Town Hero Retires." Sheriff Arduous Sterling steps down after 40 years of service. He existed. Mark clicked the image tab. There he was. A tall, imposing man with cold gray eyes and a badge that gleamed too brightly. He looked like the kind of man who ran a town with an iron fist. But that didn't prove anything. Noah could have heard the name on TV. Mark typed a new search, adding the date Noah had carved on the wall. Missing Persons, Oregon. November 14th, 1989. The first result was a digitized archive from the Portland Gazette. Article: Private investigator vanishes. Police suspect foul play and disappearance of James Miller. Mark clicked the link. The photo on the screen made his blood run cold. James Miller was a man in his mid-30s. He had dark hair, a sharp jawline, and a small, crescent-shaped scar on his chin. Mark slowly turned his head to look at Noah in the living room. Noah, who had a birthmark on his chin. In the exact same spot. In the exact same shape. Sarah walked into the study holding a piece of paper. Her face was pale. "Mark," she whispered, "look at what he drew." She placed a drawing on the desk. Noah had used a black crayon. The drawing depicted a jagged coastline, dark angry waves, and a tall cylindrical structure, a grain silo. Next to the silo, he had drawn a tractor. And underneath the tractor, he had drawn a stick figure lying horizontally. Above the figure, he had written, "Help." "I asked him what this was," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "He said, 'That's where I sleep now. It's cold under the tractor.'" Mark turned the laptop screen to Sarah. He pointed to the article about James Miller. Miller was investigating a money laundering ring involving a local lumber mill in a town called Rocky Point, Mark explained, reading the details rapidly. He went there to meet a whistleblower. He never came home. The sheriff in charge of the investigation, Arduous Sterling. "Rocky Point is 3 hours away," Sarah said. She wasn't asking a question. She was stating a fact. "We have to go." "Sarah, this is crazy," Mark argued, though his heart wasn't in it. "We can't just drive to a strange town and start digging up the past based on a 5-year-old's drawing. Sterling is still alive. The article says he still lives there." "Did you hear him last night, Mark?" Sarah slammed her hand on the desk. "He said, 'The dirt is in my mouth. Our son is suffocating. He is reliving a death. If we don't go, if we don't prove to Noah or whoever is inside him that we are listening, he's going to die. The stress is killing him.'" Mark looked at the photo of James Miller again. The man's eyes seemed to plead through the pixelated screen. "Find me." "Okay," Mark said, standing up. "Pack a bag, but we leave Noah with your mom." "No," a small voice said from the doorway. They both spun around. Noah was standing there. He wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the laptop screen. He walked over, climbed onto the chair, and touched the face of James Miller. "I have to go," Noah said. His voice was his own, but the cadence was adult, somber. "I hid the tape in the tractor seat. If we don't get it, he wins. And I can't rest until he loses." The decision was made. They loaded the car in silence. As they pulled out of the driveway, the sky turned gray, and the rain began to fall again. They were driving west, toward the coast, toward Rocky Point, toward a killer who had gotten away with it for 30 years. As they hit the highway, Noah pointed out the window at a passing blue sedan. "I had a blue car," he muttered. "A Bronco." Sterling ran it off the road. He smashed the window with his flashlight. Crunch. That was the last sound I heard. Mark gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. This wasn't a vacation. This was an excavation, and they were bringing the only witness with them. The drive to Rocky Point was a descent into a gray, suffocating world. As the Hendersons' car wound its way down the coastal highway, the towering Douglas fir trees seemed to lean in, blocking out the sky. The rain, which had been a drizzle in Eugene, was now a torrential downpour, hammering against the windshield like handfuls of gravel. Noah had fallen silent the moment they crossed the town line. He sat in his booster seat, his forehead pressed against the cold glass, his breath fogging up the window. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching. Every time they passed a landmark, a rusted water tower, a closed-down gas station, his eyes would narrow, calculating, remembering. "Turn off the wipers," Noah whispered. "The rhythm. It makes my head hurt. It sounds like the shovel." Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter. "We're almost there, buddy." Rocky Point was a town that time had forgotten, and perhaps forgiven too easily. It was a grid of salt-worn buildings clinging to the edge of a cliff. The main industry, the lumber mill, had closed years ago, leaving behind a skeleton of steel and concrete that loomed over the town like a tombstone. They checked into the Sea Mist Motel, a damp single-story establishment on the edge of town. The clerk, a woman with skin like leather and eyes that darted suspiciously, stared at their out-of-town license plates. "Visiting family?" she asked, her voice rasping like dry leaves. "Just passing through," Mark lied. "Roads are flooded north of here," she muttered, handing him a heavy brass key. "You might be stuck here a while. Be careful on the curves. People go missing on those curves." The room smelled of mildew and old secrets. While Sarah tried to get Noah to eat a sandwich, Mark decided to execute the first part of their desperate plan. He needed to locate the silo Noah had drawn. "I'm going to the library," Mark said, grabbing his raincoat. "It's the only place that will have the old property maps." "Don't take too long," Sarah said, hugging him. She looked terrified. "Noah keeps asking where Artie is. He says Artie is close." The Rocky Point Public Library was a basement beneath the town hall. It was empty, save for the hum of a dehumidifier. Mark went straight to the microfiche archives. He felt like an imposter, a high school teacher playing detective. He loaded the reel for 1989 property records. He scrolled for 20 minutes until he found it. The Miller farm. It wasn't James Miller's farm. It belonged to a distant relative. It had been seized by the bank in 1990. The map showed a large grain silo on the North Ridge. It matched Noah's drawing perfectly. Mark pulled out his phone to take a picture of the map. "You're a long way from home, Mr. Henderson." The voice was deep, resonant, and coated in a false warmth that made the hair on Mark's arms stand up. He spun around. Standing at the end of the aisle was an elderly man. He was tall, over 6 feet, leaning heavily on a polished cane made of dark walnut. He wore a heavy wool coat and a rain hat. His face was lined with deep crevices, but his eyes, pale, watery gray, were sharp as shattered glass. It was him, the man from the internet photos, Sheriff Arduous Artie Sterling. I'm sorry," Mark stammered. "Do I know you?" Sterling smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He took a slow step forward, the cane thudding against the thin carpet. Thump. Drag. Thump. "I make it my business to know everyone who comes into my town asking questions about dead men," Sterling said. "The motel clerk called me. She said a man with a nervous look was asking about the floods. But here you are, looking at property maps for land that's been abandoned for 30 years. Mark tried to steady his breathing. "I'm a historian. I'm researching the lumber industry." Sterling laughed, a dry, hacking sound. He moved closer, invading Mark's personal space. He smelled of rain, peppermint, and gun oil. "Let me give you a history lesson, son," Sterling whispered, leaning down so his face was inches from Mark's. "This town eats curiosity. James Miller was curious. He came here asking about numbers, about lumber, about money. And the ocean swallowed him whole. They never found him. Do you know why?" Mark couldn't speak. He shook his head. "Because the ocean keeps its secrets," Sterling hissed. "You have a pretty wife, a young son. I saw him in the car window. A boy that age. They are fragile. It would be a tragedy if your car slid off the cliff tonight. The fog is very thick. It wasn't a warning. It was a promise." Sterling patted Mark on the shoulder, a heavy, possessive grip. "Go home, Mr. Henderson. Pack your bags. Leave, before the history you're looking for repeats itself." Mark waited for Sterling to leave, his legs shaking so hard he had to grab a bookshelf. He ran out of the library, into the rain, and sprinted back to the motel. He burst into the room, drenched and pale. "We have to leave," Mark gasped, locking the door and chaining it. He knows. He knows we're here. He threatened us, Sarah. He threatened Noah." Sarah was sitting on the bed, crying. Noah was on the floor, curled into a fetal position, rocking back and forth. The conflict in the room was suffocating. "We can't leave," Sarah sobbed. "Look at him, Mark." Mark looked at his son. Noah was scratching his own neck, leaving red welts. He was muttering, over and over again, in that terrifyingly deep voice, "The tape is rotting. The tape is rotting. He's coming to burn it. He's coming." "If we leave now, Sterling wins," Sarah said, wiping her eyes with a fierce determination Mark had never seen before. "If we leave, Noah stays like this forever, trapped in a nightmare. We are the only ones who can wake him up." Mark looked at the door, then at his suffering son. The fear in his chest turned into something else. Anger. "Okay," Mark said. "We don't leave. We finish this. Tonight." The comeback began at midnight. It was the moment the Hendersons stopped running and started hunting. They parked their car behind an abandoned diner a mile away from the Miller farm to avoid being spotted. The rain had turned the world into a mudslide. Mark carried Noah on his back, wrapped in a poncho. Sarah held the flashlight, keeping the beam low to the ground. The hike was brutal. They had to climb over a rusted barbed wire fence and trek through a field of overgrown blackberry bushes that tore at their clothes. But Noah didn't complain. In fact, he was guiding them. "Left here," Noah commanded from Mark's back. His voice was calm, authoritative. "Watch out for the ditch. It's deep." He knew every inch of this land. He wasn't Noah anymore. He was James Miller, navigating his own crime scene. After 20 minutes of trudging through the mud, the silo loomed out of the darkness like a giant concrete finger pointing at the accusing sky. It was cracked and covered in ivy. And there, sitting in its shadow, was the tractor. It was an ancient international harvester. Red paint flaked away to reveal jagged rust. It looked like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast. Mark set Noah down. The boy walked straight to the tractor. He didn't hesitate. He pointed a small shaking finger at the driver's seat. The seat was a mess of exposed springs and rotted leather, filled with decades of compost and dead leaves. "Inside," Noah whispered. "I cut the leather. I put it inside the foam, wrapped in the oilcloth." Mark looked at Sarah. This was the moment of truth. If there was nothing there, they were insane parents dragging a child through a storm. If there was something there, their reality would break forever. Mark pulled out his pocket knife. He knelt in the mud beside the tractor. The smell of wet iron was overwhelming. He stabbed the knife into the remains of the seat cushion and began to saw. Rip, tear. He pulled out handfuls of wet yellow foam. Nothing, just rot and bugs. "It's not here, Noah," Mark said, panic rising in his throat. "It's been 30 years. Animals. The rain." "Deeper!" Noah yelled, slamming his hand on the metal fender. "I hid it so he wouldn't find it. Dig!" Mark dug his bare hands into the metal frame of the seat, scraping his knuckles against the jagged springs. He felt cold slime, sharp metal, and then something else. Something smooth. Something that didn't belong. His fingers curled around a hard, rectangular object wedged deep into the spring mechanism, wrapped tightly in heavy, greasy canvas. Mark pulled it out. He shone the flashlight on it. It was a bundle, about the size of a deck of cards. The canvas was an old mechanic's rag, soaked in motor oil, which had waterproofed it against 3 decades of Oregon rain. With trembling hands, Mark unwrapped the rag. Inside, protected by a Ziploc bag that had yellowed with age, was a microcassette tape. The label was faded, but the handwriting in blue ink was still legible. Sterling Confession, November 14th. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, covering her mouth. "It's real. It's actually real." Noah didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He just slumped against the tractor tire, letting out a long, shuddering breath. "He didn't find it," Noah whispered. "I beat him." But the victory was short-lived. Suddenly, the darkness of the field was slashed by twin beams of blinding white light. A truck engine roared to life at the top of the ridge, about 200 yards away. The light swept across the field, hunting, searching. Then, the crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley. Bang! A bullet sparked off the metal silo just inches above Mark's head. "Run!" Mark screamed, shoving the tape into his jacket pocket. "Sarah, grab Noah! Run to the woods!" Sterling hadn't just threatened them at the library. He had followed them. He knew where the body was buried, and he knew where the evidence was hidden. He had just been waiting for someone to dig it up for him. The comeback was over. Now, it was a fight for survival. "Move! Move!" Mark screamed, his voice tearing through the sound of the rain. He grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her toward the tree line. Noah was clinging to his chest, his small face buried in Mark's soaked jacket. Behind them, the roar of Sterling's truck engine was getting louder, like a beast growling in the dark. The headlights cut through the mist, sweeping erratically across the wet grass, searching for them. Bang! Another shot rang out. This one hit a fence post just a few yards to their left, sending splinters of wood flying into the mud. Sterling wasn't firing warning shots. He was firing to kill. He had buried this secret for 30 years, and he wasn't about to let a schoolteacher and a 5-year-old dig it up. "The creek!" Noah yelled over the wind. His voice was no longer terrified. It was sharp, tactical. "Head for the creek bed! The truck can't follow us there!" Mark didn't question him. He veered right, sliding down a steep, muddy embankment. Sarah slipped, crying out as her knee slammed into a rock, but adrenaline masked the pain. They scrambled into the shallow water of the creek, the icy cold soaking into their boots. The banks were high here, offering cover from the rifle. Above them, on the ridge, the truck tires spun in the mud. Sterling slammed the door shut. They heard his heavy boots hitting the ground. He was coming on foot. "I know you're down there!" Sterling's voice echoed, distorted by the wind. "You think anyone is going to believe you? A stolen tape? A crazy kid? I am the law in this county. I always have been." Mark pulled his phone out. No signal. The ravine was blocking it. "We need to get to higher ground," Mark whispered to Sarah. "We need to get to the main road." "He's going to cut us off," Noah whispered back. "He knows the deer trail. He used it to drag the body." The horror of that statement hung in the air for a second. Noah wasn't guessing. He was remembering being dragged. "Lead us, Noah," Sarah said, gripping Mark's hand. "Show us the way out." They moved in silence, tramping through the freezing water. Noah directed them through a thicket of thorns and up a rocky incline that bypassed the main trail. It was a path only a local, or a dead man, would know. 20 minutes later, they emerged from the woods onto the asphalt of the Old Coast Highway. They were exhausted, covered in mud, shivering violently. But they weren't safe yet. Their car was miles away. Suddenly, floodlights blinded them. Sterling's truck was parked in the middle of the road, blocking their path. He had anticipated them. He stood in front of the grill, the silhouette of a nightmare, leveling his hunting rifle directly at Mark's chest. "End of the road," Sterling growled. He looked ancient and demonic in the rain, his face twisted in a rictus of hate. "Hand over the tape, Mr. Henderson, and maybe I'll let the boy live." Mark stepped in front of Sarah and Noah, shielding them with his body. "It's over, Artie!" Mark shouted, bluffing with everything he had. "I uploaded the audio to the cloud while we were in the woods. The FBI has it. Killing us won't stop it." Sterling hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second, the doubt flickered in his eyes. Technology was the one thing the old sheriff didn't understand. "You're lying," Sterling spat, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Phones don't work in the hollow." "Check your radio then," Noah said. Noah stepped out from behind Mark's legs. He walked forward, ignoring his mother's scream. He stood 10 feet away from the man who had murdered him. "Check the frequency, Artie," Noah said, his voice dropping to that chilling adult baritone. "Remember 1989? You used to listen to the police scanner on Channel 4. You liked to hear them searching for me while you washed my blood off your hands." Sterling's gun wavered. His face went pale, the color draining away instantly. How do you know that?" "Because I was in the back seat," Noah said, pointing a small finger at the truck. "I wasn't dead yet. I heard you singing. You were singing Blue Moon. You sang it while you broke my fingers to get the ring off." Sterling took a step back, stumbling. He wasn't looking at a child anymore. He was seeing a ghost. The psychological wall he had built for 30 years shattered. "Shut up!" Sterling screamed, raising the rifle again, shaking uncontrollably. "You're dead! I buried you!" "You can't bury the truth!" Mark yelled, lunging forward. But before Sterling could fire, the night exploded with red and blue lights. Sirens wailed from both ends of the highway. Mark hadn't uploaded the file, but the gunshot near the silo had been heard by a nearby park ranger station. The state troopers, already suspicious of the out-of-state family and the retired sheriff's erratic behavior reported by the motel clerk, had converged. "Drop the weapon!" a voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Sheriff Sterling, drop it!" Sterling looked around wildly. He was surrounded. The game was up. He looked at Noah one last time, a look of pure, unadulterated terror, and dropped the rifle into the mud. He fell to his knees, defeated not by the police, but by the memory of the man he killed. The interrogation room at the FBI field office in Portland was quiet. The recording played on a small digital player, the magnetic tape hissing slightly before the voices became clear. "I don't care about the mill, Miller. You take the money, or you take a bullet. It's that simple. I'm not taking your dirty money, Artie. I'm going to the feds." A scuffle, a loud thud, and then silence. It was the voice of James Miller, and the voice of a younger, arduous Sterling. The tape was the smoking gun, but the real closure lay at the bottom of the quarry. Based on Noah's drawings and the details he provided to the bewildered agents, a dive team was sent to the abandoned quarry outside Rocky Point. Mark and Sarah stood by the perimeter fence, holding Noah's hand. The boy was quiet now. He looked tired, like a traveler who had walked 1,000 miles. A massive crane whirred, its cable pulling taut against the dark, murky water. Slowly, agonizingly, a shape broke the surface. It was a 1980s Ford Bronco. It was covered in algae, rusted through, and dripping with sludge. But the blue paint was still visible. As the car swung onto the bank, the forensic team moved in. They pried open the driver's side door. Inside, buckled into the seat, were the skeletal remains of a man. On the floorboard, preserved in the mud, was a gold wedding ring, the one Sterling had failed to steal because he panicked. The DNA test confirmed it within 48 hours. It was James Miller. The news went national. The boy detective, they called him, the reincarnation case of the century. But for the Hendersons, it wasn't a headline. It was an exorcism. A week later, James Miller was finally laid to rest in a proper cemetery, next to his wife who had passed away years ago, never knowing what happened to her husband. It was a sunny day, the kind of crisp Oregon autumn day that smells of pine and peace. The Hendersons stood at the grave. Noah walked up to the headstone. He traced the letters of the name. James Miller. Beloved husband. Truth seeker. Sarah held her breath. She had been waiting for this moment, terrified that the other personality would stay, that she had lost her son to a ghost forever. Noah? She asked softly. Do you want to say anything to him? Noah looked at the grave. Then he looked up at the sky. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, his shoulders relaxed. The tension, the adult posture, the haunted gaze, it all melted away. No, Noah said, his voice light and high-pitched, a normal 5-year-old's voice. He's not here anymore, Mommy. He went up. Mark knelt down. He went up? Yeah, Noah smiled, pointing at a bird flying overhead. He said thank you. He said he was tired of being cold. He's warm now. Noah turned around and tugged on Mark's hand, hopping on one foot. Dad, you promised. If we found the bad man, we could get ice cream. I want the one with the sprinkles, and I want to watch cartoons. Mark and Sarah looked at each other, tears streaming down their faces. They laughed, a sound of pure relief. Yes, buddy, Mark choked out. Double sprinkles. As much as you want. As they walked away from the grave, Noah didn't look back. The ghost of James Miller had finished his unfinished business. The conflict arc was closed, the justice was served, and a little boy was finally just a little boy again. But in the files of the FBI, and in the minds of everyone who saw the news that week, the question remained. A question that would keep people awake at night. How many other cold cases are just waiting for a child to wake up and remember them?